Hello and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Keller Williams Realty Technologies KW Technology Community Weekly Webinar. It's April 29th, 2 o'clock Austin time. We're so excited to have you all with us today. Here is what is on our agenda for April 29th. We're going to talk about the KWLS. We're going to really dig in deep. I'm going to help you to understand. We're going to help you to understand a little bit more about the KWLS, what's going on, answer any questions that you all have regarding that, and all of the above. So we're going to get that going here in just a little bit. We're also going to talk about the KW website. We have an update and some things that you probably need to know before and during the update, of course. Have just some small support issues to discuss. And then, of course, our upcoming events, and then anything that you all want to, need to, desire to talk about. All right, so let's get started with our first item on the agenda. Our first item on the agenda is a KWLS and all you need to know. We have a special guest joining us with this subject matter, Mr. Austin Lancaster. Austin, why don't you go ahead and jump on the line, say hi to everyone.
Hi, everybody.
So Austin is with our support team. Everyone, I want you to say hi to Austin and thank him and the team for all of the amazing hard work that they do. They're constantly just hammering away at those issues and problems that you all have and, hey, sometimes create, right? All right, so we're going to talk about the KWLS. Austin is what we call the SME, the SME of the KWLS. What that means is he is the subject matter expert. So he has some really great information to share on the KWLS. So let's start there. So what we're going to talk about here, Austin, is we're going to talk about some things that you need to do right away with your KWLS and managing your KWLS. This is going to help eliminate a lot of the problems. We're going to talk about the expiry date, what that means. I will explain what is locked down, what that means, and what items actually become locked down. Some best practices you have for your open houses, green sheets and statuses. We know a lot of people are running into some issues with that. We're going to hopefully dispel some of the myths and fill in some of the gaps that many of you may have on that. And then, of course, our KWLS vendors. We have vendors out there trying to help us out with the KWLS. We'll talk about some best practices in managing those. So let's get started. First things first. So Austin, tell us a little bit about the MLSID and the importance of that and why someone needs that in their profile.
Well, so the MLSID, the agent MLSID, is the item that basically causes listings to work in the KWLS for you. So if you use ListHub, this is the ID that tells ListHub whose listings your listings are and whose KWLS to put them in. And then if you don't use ListHub, the MLS ID is what activates the KWLS. So you won't be able to enter a listing unless you have an MLS ID in place. That needs to be added by Market Center leadership. Agents don't have the ability to add that themselves. But that's sort of the key that turns everything on for the KWLS.
And do they run into some error, or do they get a note anywhere that tells them that they don't have an active MLS ID? Is there a way for an agent to find out?
Well, so there sort of is. If you go to 4.1 when you're getting ready to set up WolfNet, you'll run into an error that says you have no associate MLS ID on file.
Okay.
That doesn't really tell you for the KWLS though, but that's the same error. That's the same problem.
Gotcha. So then you just simply wouldn't have the ability to add a listing to the KWLS. That would be another indicator. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, if you click create a listing, it'll also tell you the same thing. You have no associate MLS ID on file.
Very good. So what I'm looking at here is what a Market Center administrator might see, or the MCA team leader, assistant MCA, assistant team leader, and operating partner. Those roles of leadership have access to this. Is that correct?
Yeah, any regional assigned leadership role has access. So MC Tech also has access to this. That's one thing to keep in mind.
Okay, and then I also noticed that since this is my profile, my MLS is just automatically there showing Austin Board of Realtors. Does the Market Center already have all of that set up?
Your Market Center does, but some Market Centers, if you don't see the MLS that you need to choose from this list, that means you'll need to get in contact with support so that we can get you set up with an office ID. You probably already have one from your MLS. You just might need to set up a ListHub or a WolfNet account in order to get that listed on this page here.
Gotcha. Okay, and then Jeanette's asking, hey, do we have we have an alpha MLS ID and a numeric ID. Which one do we use? And do you have the answer to that?
It depends. So sometimes, this is a rare case, but this does happen, WolfNet and ListHub will have separate MLS IDs that they use. So one will use the alpha and one will use the numeric. If that's the case, the best way to find this out would be to put one in, and then you can check the ListHub exceptions report and see if that's the right one the next day. It'll tell you no match on MLS ID, and we'll go over the ListHub exceptions report here in a little bit.
Yeah,
but that's one of the errors, is that you have the wrong ID in place.
Okay, and the ListHub exceptions report is a report that leadership also has access to. We're going to talk about that here, as Austin mentioned, in just a little bit. All right, and keep your questions coming. Just because I'm not answering them doesn't mean we're not going to, okay? So we just want you all to be aware of that. Okay, hold on one second. Let me see if yep, okay, so the next one I have is actually the ListHub exceptions report, which will show any of the listings that were skipped or missed, right? Is that correct, Austin?
Yeah, so the ListHub exceptions report is a list of every listing in your market center that was sent to us by ListHub and did not make it into somebody's KWLS, and it will also list the agent MLS ID, the office MLS ID, the listing ID, and the reason why that listing didn't make it into the KWLS. There's a few errors that will list for you. One would be, no match on agent MLS ID, no match on office ID, and all of that information is listed on the report for you. So this is really handy for MC Tech coordinators and MCAs. If you're going to be troubleshooting why a listing didn't show up in the KWLS, this is the first place to check.
Excellent. So we would help our MCAs find this report by clicking on reports in their profile. You'll notice that you're in here, you'll see the reports link right underneath the photo. You click on reports, you'll get this little drop-down menu, and from there they'll be able to choose web statistics. And at the very and in web statistics is the ListHub exceptions report. Let me highlight that for you guys. That's this report here. This is the one Austin was just now talking about. And then after
that report's updated every day.
It is. Okay, awesome. And then you'll notice here we have, as Austin was mentioning, you have the associate's name right here, the associate's MLS ID, the office MLS ID, the org ID, the MLS number of the listing, and then the message. And this will say listing was skipped. Associate is not ListHub enabled. That means there was 42 listings that were skipped because the associate is not ListHub enabled. That doesn't mean 42 associates were skipped, because a single associate might have 2 or 3 of these listings. But this is a great way to determine why listings are skipped. This is the first thing when someone comes up to you and they say that they have their listings didn't make it to the syndication sites, didn't get to the KWLS. This is the first place to check. Save you guys a lot of time and effort. All right, let's move on. So how do we get to, we're going to get to the KWLS. Let me back up. I think I went a few slides too far. One second. And what we did is I just showed you all the exceptions report so that you all could see what that looked like. Okay, Austin, let's talk about the expiry date. The expiry date. This is sometimes what we call the 14-day rule. Love to hear. Tell us a little bit about what happens when a listing expires and why a listing would expire.
So when a new listing comes into the KWLS from ListHub, the 14-day rule only applies to ListHub entered listings. So if you're using the KWLS without ListHub, this part doesn't really apply to you. But when a listing comes in from ListHub, the KWLS automatically assigns an expiry date that is 14 days in the future. And that date's updated every night when the KWLS is updated by ListHub. So we get a feed every night, and every time we get a feed, that date's pushed one further day in the future. So for every single listing in the KWLS that is currently being updated by the MLS, the expiry date will always be 14 days in the future. Now, there's some caveats to how this works. So if your ListHub enabled is unchecked, then your listing's not going to update. Any of those exceptions we went over on the exceptions report will cause this not to work. So you need to make sure the listing is actually flowing through for this to happen. But that 14-day rule is not something the agent should really even worry about or have to touch, because that is going to update itself every day. And then when the listing expires or changes statuses at the MLS, that date stops updating. Now the reason for that is ListHub only sends us a feed of active listings from the MLS. So the only status that we ever get from any MLS feed through ListHub is active. So we don't get pending, we don't get contingent, we don't get anything like that. So we have this 14-day rule to sort of get around the fact that we have sort of a limited access to what the MLS has available. So that 14-day rule says that your listing is going to syndicate for 14 days after the listing changes statuses at the MLS. Now, you can come in and change that at any time during those 14 days. At that point, there's no feed from your MLS, so you can update that expiry date. If you are to update the expiry date while the listing is active, that will break the feed from the MLS, and then no changes will come over from the MLS. So no price changes, no photo changes, nothing like that will come from the MLS into the KWLS if that expiry date is further than 14 days in the future. That's sort of a broad view of that 14-day rule. In a rare circumstances, you might want to break the feed intentionally on a listing. If you want to put something in that the MLS is overwriting, we're going to go over locked fields here in a minute. But if you want to break a feed for just one listing, but you want everything else to keep flowing in, you can change that expiry date. But normally, we advise people not to touch the expiry date because it's going to manage itself. And that date's not syndicated, by the way. So nobody's going to see that on Zillow that the expiry date's in 14 days.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, because I think that's the big concern for agents. Expiration on a listing is really a big deal, and when we see that, it kind of makes us panic a little bit. So what I hear you saying, Austin, is that when you have the expiry date checked and the ListHub box checked, all right, let me back that up. When you have an active listing and you have the ListHub box checked and you just leave everything alone, it's kind of like an open door, like a trap door, I guess you could say, that things flow through easily through this door. But once we uncheck that box, or once we change that that listing or that date, that box closes. Is that what I hear you saying?
Exactly. So at that point, if you uncheck the ListHub enabled checkbox overnight, or if you change the expiry date to be something further in the future, then that listing no longer behaves as if it was a ListHub sourced listing. So it's no longer receiving a feed from your MLS. It will still syndicate for that 14 days or until the expiry date passes. But it's going to be syndicating only what's in the KWLS. So if you were to do that, you'd need to manage everything about that listing manually in the KWLS. So you'd have to change the price, manually in the KWLS as opposed to changing it in the MLS and letting it flow on through.
Agreed. And what Gail is asking, does it close the door for all listings or just the one? So Gail, I'll answer that since I brought up the door example. If you turn off the ListHub button, if you uncheck the ListHub button, that's going to close the door for all listings. If you change the expiration date on a single listing, it's just going to affect that one listing.
Right.
Okay. And then does a 14-day count today, or does it start tomorrow? So if I was to put a listing in today, it was hit the KWLS today, does that start the next day is day one?
Well, so 14 days, it's always going to be 14 days in the future. So if you put in a listing today, it should be showing the 13th of May as the expiry date.
Clear on that.
Tomorrow it would show the 14th, etc.
Understood. And then Eric is asking, if you change the date back within the 14 days, does it resync? And Eric, I think the thing you should do is just turn the go ahead and put it back somewhere in the future. Leave the ListHub box checked and let the system do its own thing.
Yeah, if you change the date back to within 14 days of today, tomorrow you'll see that date update. That 14-day rule is just sort of a net, so you can put it back in that range and it will update itself.
I like that. I like that. Okay, so let's move on. I think we're now talking about locking down. A lot of questions are coming regarding locking down. In fact, I think Gail asked, "Hey, if I lock it down, does that mean that does a listing still flow through if stuff's locked down?" And we're going to talk a little bit about what is locked down. So I don't know if you all can see on the screen, but we have several items here that have a highlight on them, and I'll click on those. And Austin, go ahead and talk to us a little bit about what locked down means.
Okay, so for a listing that is within that expiry date window, the 14-date window, and has ListHub enabled checked. So this is a listing that's flowing all the way through from the MLS to the syndication sites. There are a few things that you can lock and edit in the KWLS that will syndicate, but for everything else, the MLS feed through ListHub is going to overwrite that data every day when we receive that feed. So the items that can be locked are description, and the description has a little checkbox just below that field, and that checkbox locks the description field. So if your MLS has a character limit on a description and you want to put a longer description in for Zillow and Trulia or for the ListHub sites, you can do that here in the KWLS. Just check that box and then enter your description. Now keep in mind that all of the lockable fields are not affected by the ListHub enabled checkbox, so you can leave that checked while you edit these. Another thing that you can lock are the photos. So if your MLS has a limit on a number of photos that you can put in, say it's 20, the KWLS allows up to 30 photos to be added to the KWLS. So you can check the box up there, and when you do that, that's going to activate the uploader. So when you check it, you'll see a little box pop up, just like the one on the screen, and you can browse and upload your own pictures to the KWLS, like I said, up to 30. And those will not be affected by the MLS import. So as long as that box is checked, those are the photos that are going to syndicate. No photos from the MLS are going to come in and replace them. The other two items that are lockable, and they actually don't have checkboxes, just when you edit them, it locks them, are open houses and virtual tours. And we're going to talk a little bit more about open houses here in a little bit, but if you put an open house or a virtual tour link in the KWLS, that'll syndicate straight out from the KWLS. You don't have to worry about the MLS feed overriding that. But like I said, for everything else, so for prices, for addresses, anything like that, if you go in and edit that in the KWLS, it's going to flip back to what's in the MLS the following day. So for any of those kinds of changes, you want to make sure that that change was made in the MLS first, and then just let the KWLS do its job.
Nice. So if you add more photos in the KWLS, does that break the ListHub connection and no longer update?
No, just for the photos.
So if you're adding photos, you can add as many photos as much as you want, and it doesn't affect your feed at all. Is that right?
Right, yeah. So there's two feeds here, the incoming feed and the outgoing feed. If you click the box to edit your photos here, that means that the outgoing feed's only going to show it's in the KWLS, but it will not affect the incoming feed. So everything else that's coming in from the MLS is going to continue to update your listing like normal.
Okay, very good. David, you're asking a question. I was going to answer this through type, but I'll just answer it. He says, we're not on a team. How do we input two different agents on one listing? I don't know that that can be done, David. It might be able to be done somewhere in the description without branding too much. That would be a question you need to ask your broker as well to see if that something like that is allowed.
Well, so the KWLS actually doesn't allow co-listing in terms of connecting two agents' accounts to one listing.
Right.
And the reason for that is because the KWLS's purpose is syndication, and almost none of the syndication sites allow for co-listing. So in order to make that easier, neither does the KWLS. Listing agent number one is who gets that listing.
Awesome. Okay, so next you promised we're going to talk a little bit about open houses. Tell us some of the open house best practices.
So some MLSs do and some MLSs don't syndicate open houses. So if you put an open house in your MLS on a Tuesday and it's going to be for that Saturday, logically you would think if I put it in the MLS, it's going to show up in KWLS tomorrow and it'll be on the syndication sites in plenty of time for that open house on Saturday. Generally that's the case, but there are some MLSs that don't syndicate open houses. So the best practice on setting up an open house to make sure that it shows up on all of our syndication sites is put it in your MLS, because your MLS is going to syndicate places that we don't, like Realtor.com or Redfin. But the KWLS is going to syndicate to all of the rest of the sites. And so just to be safe, we suggest putting that open house in both the MLS and the KWLS. And then it's going to syndicate to everywhere that it can, and you don't have to worry about any sort of hiccups in the system with that. Usually that's not even a hiccup in the system. Usually that's just an MLS that doesn't send open houses in their feed to us.
Okay, and Austin, I'm going to ask this question because it's been asked several times, and it always comes up every time. I heard, and I'm reading this, I didn't hear this. I heard that I can enter the listing into the KWLS first and then enter it in the MLS, and that's better. Can you help me with that question, please?
There's no real reason to do that. You can do that. If you're going to do that, you would have to make sure that the MLS number is in the KWLS and that expiration date is set to be 14 days in the future. If you do that and the listing syndicates from the MLS, they'll update. I mean, it'll start updating the KWLS like normal. But we generally advise against that because the KWLS is actually set up to pull listings from your MLS. So if you put a listing in the MLS today and you just let it feed, it's going to show up in the KWLS tomorrow, and it's going to show up on our syndication sites tomorrow because we feed twice a day, but it's overnight. So that listing's going to hit the KWLS and the syndication sites the following day. Now, if you put it in the KWLS first and then put it in the MLS, it's not really going to make much of a difference because, like I said, it syndicates overnight, but it does syndicate twice overnight. So that listing's still just going to hit the syndication sites the following day. So there's not really any need to put the listing in the KWLS first. In fact, that causes more problems than it alleviates. Just because if you don't have that expiry date right, or if you forget to recheck the ListHub enabled checkbox, I mean, there's a whole slew of problems that could cause if you're not paying extra special attention to it. So we generally advise against it.
Very good. All right. Hey, what do you think of this graphic? It's a good graphic. Isn't that a great graphic? What are we talking about here, folks? That's right, Greensheets. That's the best graphic I could find. Love it. All right, tell me. I'm just killing myself over here, Austin. Everybody else thinks it's as funny as I do. All right, so tell us a little bit about Greensheets and statuses. So we have had some issues sent to our support team. Tell us a little bit about that.
So a lot of times we'll get issues where an agent is asking us why their listing that is pending or contingent or active is showing as sold in the KWLS, and they generally think that had something to do with a feed or an error. That's usually not the case, actually. The KWLS only has 2 automatic status changes. The first one we already talked about, that's active to expired. So when it passes that date, when we stop receiving a feed, it will automatically switch to expired unless you've done something with it. The other automatic status change is Greensheets. So this will turn your listing from active to sold, and that happens at a specific point during the Greensheet process. So when you submit the Greensheet to the MCA, it gets approved for compliance and finance, and then the MCA's last step is to put that Greensheet in Winmore. Once that Greensheet's been submitted to Winmore, that automatically sets the listing in the KWLS to sold. So if you are wondering why your listing in the KWLS is sold and you didn't manually set it that way, it's usually because your MCA's already submitted that listing, that Greensheet to Winmore.
Got it. Okay, so we're going to say that you don't submit it. You don't submit that Greensheet until you have followed all of your processes in your market center. Talk to your market center administrator. Make sure they're aware of this so that we don't run into any problems. Typically, you guys are the first ones that the agents go to with problems. With errors, and that's why we're making sure that you know first. You don't always have access to everything that is needed to fix it, but you are typically the person they go to, so you can get to the people that can fix it. All right, let's move on. One more thing here. I love this screen here. So we got actually a couple more. So let's talk about branding and photos. So this is a good example of one of the reasons we don't recommend branding with photos. Yes, you all see Kevin. You see Dream Key Real Estate, and a great way to get in touch with them, but do you really even see the house? The answer is no. We've seen a lot of this when we were recommending branding photos. This, of course, probably wouldn't be allowed through the syndication sites, would it, Austin?
No. So, for the most part, we advise for Trulia and Zillow because those are the, our main two syndication sites. Yeah, there are 190 something others plus all of their affiliates, but the ones that most of your customers are going to be looking at are Zillow and Trulia, and they have some pretty strict guidelines on branding. On photos, they do allow a watermark, but it needs to be 5% or less of the surface of that picture. So the one that we're looking at here is sort of an obvious example of what not to do. Now, Zillow and Trulia don't always check for it, but if they notice it, they'll send you a takedown notice. And they can either re-edit your pictures, and sometimes they do some really funky stretching on them, or they'll just take your photos or your listing down altogether. So we generally advise against any sort of excessive branding on your photos.
Now the reality is you can brand all you want all day, every day in the KWLS because it is your data. I mean, that's the honest truth. So it's not a matter of just the capability is there, absolutely. It's just once it hits the syndication sites, that's when it becomes a problem. So if it was just in the KW.com systems, it wouldn't be an issue. But since we're dealing with third-party vendors, we have to be very aware of their limitations and their rules.
Right. It's not against any regulations of ours, but if you want maximum exposure of your listing, it's generally best not to do this.
Very good. Thank you very much. So he's recommending don't put my face and my branding all over your listings. All right, so let's talk a little bit just really quickly about KWLS. There are some vendors out there that are attempting to help out agents with their listings using single sign-on, single listing entry, whatever it may be called. Can you tell us a little bit about how the support team deals with these and what types of issues that they may create?
Yeah, so there's only one authorized vendor to get listings from your MLS into the KWLS, and that's ListHub. And we can troubleshoot that feed. That's a feed that updates once a day, so we're aware of it. We have tools to look at that feed and to help you resolve problems if you run into them. Your Market Center also has that ListHub exceptions report, so ListHub is the approved vendor. If you don't use ListHub, we suggest just manually entering in the KWLS. And the reason for that is some of these third-party vendors that will do sort of a single entry type of a setup where you just enter your listing in their website and then it'll show up in the KWLS and your MLS at the same time. Those are problematic because there is no feed. We don't go check for a feed and the KWLS doesn't update with a feed. What that's actually doing is just logging into your MyKW account for you and then filling out all the fields in the KWLS for you. So where this becomes a problem is if you go into one of those vendors' websites and you try to make an edit, that edit's not going to edit the listing in the KWLS. In fact, it's going to duplicate that listing in the MLS or in the KWLS, excuse me, and that's going to cause some problems on the syndication sites. So Trulia and Zillow run into a lot of issues with duplicate listings. Trulia is able to handle it a little bit better, but when Zillow sees two listings from the same source for the same property, they won't post either, and they'll throw them out and they'll see if they can find another feed, or they may just not post the listing at all. So we generally advise not to use any third-party vendors to enter your listings in the KWLS. If your Market Center doesn't use ListHub, that's okay, but we would suggest manually entering your listings in the KWLS. It's a little bit of extra work, but it's the best way to make sure that you have maximum control over your listings and what's showing on all of those sites.
All right, and just to verify what Austin's saying is that use ListHub, which is integrated within the KWLS, KW systems. If you are using a third-party vendor that is not affiliated with the KWLS system, then you're taking the risk on your own, and there are issues and problems you're going to run into that our support team simply can't fix for you. So right. Just be aware of that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want you all to give this young man a big hand. He is just completely awesome. Thank you, Austin. If you don't mind, Austin, we're going to have you stick around on the line for just a moment and talk about some quick support issues that we have. But thank him for his expertise and all that great information. And as always, you can find Austin at support@kw.com. All right, so let's talk about our KW website update. There's a couple things I need for you all to be aware of. That's the same thing we were talking about. Did you know that your agents aren't going to be activated with their new KW website if they don't have an MLSID associated with a profile? So what could happen is all other agents in that market center could be activated. They're not going to. First person they're going to come to you is going to come to is you. So we need to make sure that you know how and where to tell your MCA to look. In the exceptions report, which we talked about just a moment ago, under web statistics, and then under ListHub exceptions report, they can pull up the ListHub's exceptions report, and underneath these lines here, underneath this line here is going to be all of the information that they need regarding that listing. So please make sure everybody has their MLS ID associated with their profile. It should be part of your onboarding process. Also, an agent needs a KW.com email address in order for them to have their to get their place to website. So they need their email address in order to get their place to website. And of course, if you are on MyKW and you hover over technology, that will take you to your KW email link where you can then sign up for your KW email. This is a pretty simple process in order for them to get to it. They just go in and they create their email. Even if they're not going to use their KW email account through Google, have them request it anyway. They still get access to all of those other great Google applications, including YouTube, Drive, Calendar, so forth. So they can use all of those tools without even having to use their email account, their Gmail account. But they still need that KW email address. That is vital. All right, Austin, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
All right. Hey, you had a quick support issue to talk to us about. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm sure that as tech coordinators and ambassadors, a lot of you run into issues with importing contacts. I can say that that system normally works pretty well as long as you follow all of the guidelines, but it is pretty finicky in terms of making sure that you follow every exact guideline. Normally, when you upload a contact list into eEdge, there a little status next to that upload job is going to say waiting to run, and that usually lasts for 30 minutes to an hour. That's just the system going through line by line on your Excel spreadsheet and entering those in as contacts. But in the last couple of days, we've seen a few users upload their contacts list successfully. It says waiting to run, and then it just gets stuck like that for hours or up to a day. If you see that problem, you can give support a call. Really, it's going to have to go to market leaders, so you can actually call market leader directly. They're aware of the issue, and they're working on it right now, and we do hope to have a resolution to that soon.
All right, awesome. Thank you for that. So basically all they're going to do is look in, make sure that status is not running any longer, that they get a complete or successful. If it's still running after a couple hours, go ahead and contact our support team. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Support at KW.com. Couldn't be easier. All right. So one last thing. We're going to talk about our upcoming events. So you all should see that come on the screen now. So we, of course, have our weekly webinar, KW Technology Community session. That is what we've just completed. Congratulations. And tomorrow, we're going to talk about creating, Monday, we're going to talk about creating area pages for your new KW website. And then next Monday, the 9th, we have our Internet Lead Generation Series. I think this is the last one with Carrie Sylvester. If you haven't seen these, you guys got to check these out. They're awesome. And then Spotlight on KW Technology, blogging with KW websites. That's May 16th. And then our leading eEdge technology strategies. We're going to have a special guest talking to us about KW websites and what they've done with those KW websites. That's May 23rd. And then we will follow up with no webinars on May 30th in observance of Memorial Day. Someone's asking if we have the webinars with Paul Arvey recorded. The answer to that is yes. You can find all of those available on the KW Technologies YouTube page. And if you give me just a moment, I will show you all where you can get to that pretty quickly. So if you're looking at the screen now and you hover over the technology menu, which is here. Oh, I need a regular pointer. Which is here, and then you actually just click on the technology menu. Once you click on the technology menu, you'll get to this screen, and if you want to find out any of the past recordings, just click on those links and they will take you to our YouTube channel. The Leading E-Edge Technology Strategies is the one that we have our special guests. So you can see all of those that we've had featuring all of our special guests for 2016. All right, so there's that. So we want you all to take advantage of that. And then one last thing, you know, we always like to have a quick, a little factoid for you guys. I had a heck of a time finding a factoid for today, but here's one that I found. Did you all know that the like button was originally recommended to be called the awesome button by the engineers, but apparently that was not given a thumbs up. Boom. All right. Hey, thanks everyone. As always, we love having you here. We want you to stay on the edge of real estate technology by using KW technology. And as always, make it a great day at Keller Williams.